This happened during my sophomore year of high school, back in 2019. I attended Lincoln High School in a mid-sized town in Ohio. It was the kind of school where everyone knew everyone, at least within your grade. We had about 1,200 students total, and the building itself was this old brick structure that had been added onto multiple times over the decades. Some hallways were newer with bright fluorescent lights, while others were dimly lit with that old yellowish lighting that flickered sometimes. I remember this day really clearly because it started off so normal. It was a Wednesday in late October, and the weather had just started to turn cold. I wore my favorite hoodie to school that day, the navy blue one with our school mascot on it. My first two classes were completely ordinary. In first period English, we were reading To Kill a Mockingbird and having discussions about it. Second period was algebra, which I was struggling with, as usual, but nothing out of the ordinary happened. Third period was where things got strange. I had U.S. history third period, and when I walked into the classroom, I immediately noticed that our regular teacher, Mr. Phillips, wasn't there. Instead, there was a substitute teacher I'd never seen before. Now, we got substitute teachers fairly often, so this wasn't unusual by itself. What was unusual was this particular substitute. He was a tall man, probably in his early 40s, with dark hair that was graying at the temples. He wore a button-down shirt and khakis, which was pretty standard for teachers at our school. But there was something about him that felt off from the very beginning. He didn't smile or greet us as we came in like most substitute teachers did. He just sat at Mr. Phillips' desk, staring at the computer screen. When the bell rang to start class, he stood up and introduced himself as Mr. Harrison. His voice was flat, almost monotone. He told us that Mr. Phillips was out sick and that we would be working on our assigned reading for the period. He wrote a chapter number on the board and told us to read silently. This was actually great news for most of us because it meant we didn't have to do much work, but something about the way he said it made me uncomfortable. I sat near the back of the classroom by the windows. My best friend Sarah sat next to me, and my friend Mike sat in front of me. We exchanged glances when Mr. Harrison sat back down at the desk without saying anything else. Sarah leaned over and whispered, "This guy is weird." I nodded in agreement. For the first 10 minutes or so, we all did our reading. The classroom was quiet except for the sound of pages turning and the occasional cough or someone shifting in their seat. I kept glancing up at Mr. Harrison, and every time I did, he was just staring at the computer screen. He wasn't typing or clicking the mouse, he was just staring. About 15 minutes into the class, I noticed something else that was strange. Mr. Harrison kept looking at the classroom door. Not just casual glances, but long, focused stares. He would look at the door for maybe 30 seconds, then look back at the computer screen, then look at the door again. This pattern repeated over and over. I nudged Sarah and tilted my head toward the front of the room. She looked up and watched him for a minute, then her eyes widened. She'd noticed it too. We didn't say anything, just went back to pretending to read our textbooks. Then, about 25 minutes into class, Mr. Harrison did something that really freaked me out. He stood up from the desk and walked over to the classroom door. Our door had a small window in it, one of those narrow rectangular windows that let you see into the hallway. Mr. Harrison looked out this window for a solid minute, not moving, not saying anything. A few other students noticed and started whispering among themselves. After staring out the window, Mr. Harrison did something even stranger. He locked the classroom door. Now, teachers sometimes locked their doors during class, especially in more recent years with all the security concerns, so this wasn't necessarily alarming by itself, but combined with everything else, it felt wrong. He walked back to the desk, sat down, and went back to staring at the computer screen. The room was completely silent now. Even the students who hadn't been paying attention were starting to notice that something was off. I looked at the clock. We still had about 20 minutes left in the period. I tried to focus on my reading, but I kept reading the same paragraph over and over without absorbing any of the words.
My mind was racing, trying to figure out what was going on. Then, about 5 minutes after he'd locked the door, we heard footsteps in the hallway. They were getting closer to our classroom. Mr. Harrison's head snapped up, and he stared at the door. The footsteps stopped right outside our room. There was a knock on the door. Mr. Harrison didn't move. He just sat there, staring at the door. The knock came again, louder this time. We could see a shadow through the small window in the door, someone standing right outside.
"Mr. Harrison?" a voice called from the hallway. It was a woman's voice, and it sounded like it might be one of the office staff, but I couldn't be sure. Mr. Harrison still didn't move. He didn't answer. He didn't get up to open the door. He just sat there. The knocking continued, more insistent now. "Mr. Harrison, I need to speak with you. Please open the door." Some of the students were starting to look really uncomfortable now. A girl named Jessica, who sat near the front of the room, raised her hand. Mr. Harrison, someone's at the door." He looked at her with an expression I can only describe as blank. "I know," he said simply, then looked back at the door. The knocking stopped. We could hear the footsteps moving away, getting quieter as whoever it was walked down the hallway. The classroom was dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Sarah grabbed my arm under our desks. Her hand was shaking. Mike turned around in his seat and mouthed, "What's going on?" at me. I just shook my head. Mr. Harrison stood up again. He walked to the door and looked out the window once more. Then he walked back to his desk, but this time he didn't sit down. He just stood there, looking at all of us. "I need everyone to remain calm," he said. His voice was still flat, emotionless. "Stay in your seats. Don't make any noise." "What's happening?" Mike asked. His voice cracked a little. "Just stay calm and stay quiet," Mr. Harrison repeated. My heart was pounding now. This was wrong. Everything about this situation was wrong. I could feel my phone in my pocket, and I thought about texting my mom or even calling 911, but I was afraid to move. I didn't want to draw attention to myself. The minutes ticked by agonizingly slowly. Mr. Harrison remained standing by his desk, occasionally glancing at the door. None of us were pretending to read anymore. We were all just sitting there, scared and confused. Then, maybe 10 minutes after the knocking had stopped, we heard the sound of the intercom system clicking on. There was a brief moment of static, and then the principal's voice came through the speakers. "Teachers and students, we are now in a lockdown. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Teachers, please secure your classrooms immediately. Students, please follow all lockdown procedures. Remain calm and quiet." The announcement ended, and the intercom clicked off. The effect on the classroom was immediate. Several students gasped. Jessica started crying quietly. Sarah's grip on my arm tightened. But what really scared me was Mr. Harrison's reaction. He smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a slight upturn of his lips, but it was the first expression I'd seen on his face since we'd entered the classroom, and it was absolutely terrifying in that context.
"See?" he said to no one in particular. "I told you to stay calm." He walked over to the windows and pulled down all the blinds, plunging the room into a dimmer light. This was part of the lockdown procedure we'd practiced in drills. Lock the door, turn off the lights, close the blinds, and sit quietly away from windows and doors. But Mr. Harrison was doing it all with this eerie calm that made my skin crawl. "Everyone move away from the windows and the door," he instructed. "Sit on the floor along that wall." He pointed to the wall opposite the windows. We all scrambled to comply, gathering our bags and moving to where he'd indicated. We sat in a tight group, pressing against each other. Sarah was still holding on to my arm, and I could feel her trembling. Mike sat on my other side, his face pale. Mr. Harrison turned off the lights, then moved to sit at his desk again. We could barely see him in the dim room, just his silhouette against the slightly brighter area near the door. We sat there in silence. I could hear people breathing heavily, some sniffling as they tried not to cry. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second seeming to last forever. After about 5 minutes, we heard sounds in the hallway. Footsteps, but multiple sets this time. They seemed to be moving quickly, purposefully. Then we heard voices, but they were too muffled to make out what they were saying. Mr. Harrison stood up and moved toward the door again. He looked out the window, and I saw his posture change. He seemed to tense up. More sounds from the hallway. It sounded like people were going in and out of the classroom next to ours. We could hear doors opening and closing, more muffled voices. Then there was a loud knock on our door. Not like the earlier knock. This one was aggressive, demanding. "This is the police! Open the door immediately!" My heart leapt. The police were here. We were going to be okay. I looked at Mr. Harrison, expecting him to rush to the door and open it, but he didn't move. "Mr. Harrison!" Mike suddenly shouted. "Open the door! It's the police!" Several other students joined in, calling out to Mr. Harrison to open the door. Jessica was crying openly now. Sarah was squeezing my arm so hard it hurt. The banging on the door got louder. "Open this door or we're coming in!" And then Mr. Harrison did something that made my blood run cold. He backed away from the door, moved to his desk, and pulled something out of the drawer. It was dark in the room, and I couldn't see clearly what it was at first, but as he moved closer to where we were all huddled, I could make it out.
It was a knife. Not a big one, maybe like a pocket knife or a utility knife, but definitely a knife. Several students screamed. Sarah pulled me backward, trying to move away from him. Mike jumped to his feet. "Stay calm," Mr. Harrison said, but his voice wasn't flat anymore. It was shaking. "Just stay calm. They don't understand. I'm trying to protect you." "From what?" Mike yelled. "You're the one scaring us." The banging on the door intensified. We could hear more voices now, multiple people shouting commands from the hallway. Mr. Harrison was between us and the door. He was pacing now, the knife in his hand, muttering to himself. I caught fragments of what he was saying. "Not safe, they don't know, can't let them." I made a decision in that moment. I slowly reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I kept my eyes on Mr. Harrison as I unlocked it and pulled up my recent messages. I texted my mom, "Lockdown at school, man with knife in our classroom, RM204, help." I hit send and quickly shoved the phone back in my pocket, praying he hadn't seen me. The door suddenly shook violently. They were trying to break it down. Mr. Harrison spun around to face it, still holding the knife. "No," he shouted, "you can't come in, it's not safe." Another massive impact on the door, and we heard the sound of wood splintering. Mr. Harrison moved toward the door, and that's when Mike did something incredibly brave and incredibly stupid. He rushed at Mr. Harrison from the side and tackled him. They both went down hard, crashing into a desk. The knife skittered across the floor. Several students screamed. I jumped up and ran toward where the knife had landed, as did two other guys from our class. One of them, a guy named Derek who was on the football team, got there first and kicked it away toward the corner of the room. The door burst open, and suddenly the room was full of police officers in tactical gear, flashlights mounted on their weapons, all pointed at the chaos in the middle of the classroom. "Hands up! Get on the ground! Now!" Mike had already scrambled away from Mr. Harrison, his hands in the air. Mr. Harrison was lying on the floor where he'd fallen, and within seconds multiple officers were on top of him, pulling his arms behind his back and handcuffing him. "Everybody okay? Anyone hurt?" one of the officers called out to us. We were all crying or in shock or both, but no one was physically injured. The officers quickly ushered us out of the classroom and down the hallway. I caught a glimpse of Mr. Harrison as they hauled him to his feet. He wasn't fighting them. He just looked confused and lost, like he didn't understand what was happening. We were taken to the gym where other students were gathering. The school was evacuating everyone systematically, checking each room to make sure it was secure. I saw Mike being talked to by several officers, and a woman I assumed was a detective. He looked shaken, but okay.
Sarah and I sat together on the gym floor, holding on to each other.
My phone buzzed with frantic messages from my mom, and I called her to let her know I was okay. She was already on her way to the school. It took hours for everything to be cleared and for parents to be allowed to pick up their kids. We learned more about what had happened in bits and pieces from officers and school staff. Apparently, Mr. Harrison wasn't actually a substitute teacher. He was someone who had applied for a teaching position at our school months earlier, but had been rejected after a background check revealed some concerning mental health history. He'd somehow obtained a substitute teacher credential from another state and had shown up that morning claiming to be the substitute for Mr. Phillips, who really was out sick. The office staff had started to become suspicious when they couldn't verify his credentials, which is why they'd come to our classroom to check on him. When he didn't answer the door, they'd called the police. Mr. Harrison apparently believed that there was some kind of threat to the school and that he was protecting us by locking down our classroom. The knife wasn't meant to threaten us, at least according to what he told police later, but to defend us from whatever threat he believed existed. He was experiencing some kind of psychotic break. Mike became a hero at school for tackling him, though he said he didn't feel like a hero. He said he just reacted without thinking and was terrified the whole time. The school brought in counselors for the next several weeks to help students process what had happened. I had nightmares for months afterward. Sometimes I still think about that day, about sitting in that dark classroom, not knowing what was going to happen. The scariest part wasn't even when Mr. Harrison pulled out the knife. It was all those minutes before that, when we knew something was wrong, but couldn't figure out what it was.
That feeling of dread building and building with no understanding of why. I learned later that my text to my mom had actually helped. She'd called 911 immediately and given them my location, which helped the police locate our specific classroom more quickly. The school was big, and they'd initially been searching a different wing of the building. Mr. Phillips came back to school a few days later, and he was horrified when he learned what had happened. He felt guilty somehow, even though none of it was his fault. We all tried to reassure him that we didn't blame him. I'm in college now, and that day still affects me. I'm more aware of my surroundings, more cautious about people who seem off in some way. But I also learned that sometimes people who seem threatening are actually just scared and confused themselves. Mr. Harrison needed help, not a teaching position. The system failed when it allowed him to slip through and get into our classroom that day. I also learned how brave normal people can be in terrifying situations. Mike didn't have to do what he did. None of us would have blamed him if he'd just stayed put. But he acted, and his actions probably prevented something even worse from happening. That's my story. It doesn't have a neat, tidy ending because real life doesn't work that way. But I'm here, I'm okay, and I'm grateful every day that it didn't turn out worse than it did.
This happened during my junior year of high school in 2021. I went to Riverside High School, a large suburban school in Texas with about 2,000 students. The campus was sprawling, with multiple buildings connected by covered walkways, several parking lots, athletic fields, and even a small wooded area on the edge of the property that separated us from a neighborhood. I had just gotten my driver's license that summer, and I was so excited to finally be able to drive myself to school instead of taking the bus. My parents had given me their old Honda Civic, a silver 2008 model that had seen better days but ran fine. It wasn't cool, but it was mine, and that's what mattered. The main student parking lot was huge and right next to the school, but you needed a parking pass to park there, and there was a waiting list. Since I'd gotten my license in the middle of summer, I missed the window to apply for a pass for the fall semester. The school had overflow parking in what we called the far lot, which was exactly what it sounds like, a smaller parking area on the far edge of campus, past the athletic fields and close to that wooded area I mentioned. Most students hated parking in the far lot because it meant a longer walk to the school buildings, especially on hot days or when it rained. But I didn't mind it much. The walk was maybe 10 minutes, and I usually had headphones in, listening to music, so it was actually kind of nice, a peaceful start and end to my school day. For the first few weeks of school, everything was completely normal. I'd park in the far lot, walk to school, go through my classes, and walk back in the afternoon. There were usually about 20 to 30 other cars in the far lot, mostly other students who either didn't have parking passes yet or preferred the far lot because it was less crowded and easier to get in and out of. The first weird thing happened about 3 weeks into the school year. It was a Thursday morning, and I had arrived at school around 7:15 a.m. School started at 7:45, so I had plenty of time. I parked in my usual area. I'd found a spot I liked near a tree that provided some shade and got out of my car.
As I was getting my backpack out of the back seat, I noticed another car pull into the lot. It was a dark blue sedan, maybe a Nissan or Toyota, nothing remarkable about it. What was remarkable was that instead of parking in an actual spot, the car just stopped in the middle of the driving lane, facing toward where I was parked. I paused, waiting for the car to move, thinking maybe the driver was looking for a specific spot or was confused about where to park. But the car just sat there, engine running, headlights on. I couldn't see who was driving because of the glare from the headlights and the way the morning sun was hitting the windshield. I stood there for a moment, feeling a little awkward, then decided to just ignore it and start walking to school. Maybe it was a parent dropping off a student or something. As I started walking, I noticed that the car began to move. Slowly, it drove forward, then turned into a parking spot a few rows away from where I'd parked. I didn't think much of it at the time, just someone who took a while to decide where to park. The same thing happened the next day. Friday morning, I pulled into the far lot around the same time, 7:15 or so. As I was getting out of my car, that same dark blue sedan pulled in. Once again, it stopped in the middle of the driving lane, facing toward me, sitting there with the engine running. This time, it felt weirder. I tried to get a look at who was driving, but I still couldn't see through the windshield clearly. After about 30 seconds, the car moved to a parking spot, again a few rows away from mine, but with a clear view of where I'd parked. I told myself I was being paranoid. It was a public parking lot. Lots of people parked there. It was probably just a coincidence that I'd noticed the same car 2 days in a row. But then it happened again, on Monday, and Tuesday, and Wednesday.
Every single morning that week, I would pull into the far lot, and within a minute or two, that dark blue sedan would appear. It would stop in the middle of the lane, headlights pointed at me, sit there for a bit, then park within view of my car. By Wednesday, I was genuinely freaked out. I started trying to vary my arrival time, coming to school earlier some days and later on others. Didn't matter. The blue sedan would show up within minutes of my arrival. I tried to see who was driving, but I could never get a clear look. I could tell it was a man, I think, but that was about it. The windows were tinted, and there was always something, the angle of the sun, the headlight glare, the distance, that prevented me from seeing clearly. I told my best friend Rachel about it. She thought I was overreacting at first, but when I described how consistent it was, how the car always showed up right after I did, she agreed it was creepy. "Have you told your parents?" she asked. I hadn't. I didn't want to worry them, and part of me was still hoping it was all just a weird coincidence that would stop on its own. Thursday morning, I decided to try something different. Instead of getting out of my car right away, I just sat there after parking, watching my mirrors to see if the blue sedan would show up. Sure enough, about 2 minutes after I parked, I saw it pull into the lot in my rearview mirror. It did its usual thing, stopping in the middle of the lane, but this time, since I wasn't getting out of my car, it just sat there. We both just sat there, his car and mine, for what felt like forever, but was probably only about 3 minutes. Then the blue sedan slowly pulled forward and parked in its usual area. I waited another minute, then quickly got out of my car and started walking toward school, moving fast and keeping my head on a swivel.
I didn't see anyone get out of the blue sedan, but I had a prickling feeling on the back of my neck, like I was being watched. That afternoon, when I walked back to the far lot after school, I took a different route than usual, going around the back of the athletic building instead of past the football field like I normally did. I don't know why I did it. Instinct, I guess. When I got to the parking lot, I approached my car from a different direction than usual, and that's when I saw him. There was a man standing next to my car. He wasn't touching it or anything, just standing there, looking at it. He was maybe in his 40s or 50s, wearing jeans and a dark jacket despite the warm weather. He had dark hair and sunglasses on. My heart jumped into my throat. I stopped walking, ducking behind another car so he wouldn't see me. I watched him for a minute. He walked around my car slowly, looking at it from different angles. Then he tried the door handle. My car was locked. I always locked it, so the door didn't open, but the fact that he tried it made my blood run cold. I didn't know what to do. I thought about calling 911, but what would I say? A man was standing near my car in a public parking lot? He hadn't actually done anything illegal yet. While I was trying to decide what to do, the man walked away from my car and got into the blue sedan. He sat there for a minute, then started the engine and drove away. I waited until he was completely gone before I ran to my car, jumped in, locked the doors, and drove home as fast as I could without actually speeding. That night, I told my parents everything. My dad was angry that I hadn't said something sooner, but my mom was more focused on figuring out what to do next. We decided that I should report it to the school and that my dad would follow me to school in his car the next morning to see if the man showed up. Friday morning, my dad followed me in his truck. I parked in the far lot at my usual time, and sure enough, the blue sedan appeared. My dad, who had parked a few rows away, got out of his truck and started walking toward the blue sedan.
The car immediately reversed and drove out of the parking lot, speeding away. My dad got a partial license plate number and took a photo of the car as it left. We reported everything to the school that morning. The assistant principal, Mr. Chen, took it very seriously. He thanked me for reporting it and said they would increase security patrols in the far lot and that I should park in the main lot for the time being, even without a pass. I thought that was the end of it. The man had been scared off, and I wouldn't have to worry about him anymore. I was wrong. The following Tuesday, I was parking in the main lot before school when I noticed a dark blue sedan parked in the visitor parking area near the front office. My stomach dropped. It looked like the same car, though I couldn't be 100% sure. I sat in my car for a minute, trying to decide what to do. Then I saw a man get out of the blue sedan and start walking toward the main school building. It was him. Same build, same dark jacket, even though it was another warm day. I immediately called the front office from my cell phone and told them there was a man I'd reported for following me who was heading toward the building. The secretary said they'd check it out and that I should stay in my car. A few minutes later, I saw Mr. Chen come out of the building with our school resource officer, Deputy Williams. They approached the man, who was now standing near the entrance. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I could see them talking. The conversation seemed to get heated. The man was gesturing a lot, and Mr. Chen was shaking his head. Then Deputy Williams said something, and the man started to walk away, back toward the visitor parking lot. But instead of getting in his car and leaving, he just stood there next to it, staring at the school building.
More school staff came out, including our principal, Dr. Martinez. There was more talking, and finally Deputy Williams got on his radio. A few minutes later, 2 police cars arrived. The police talked to the man for a while. I saw him getting more and more agitated, raising his voice. I could hear it from where I was parked, though I couldn't make out the words. Eventually, they seemed to calm him down, and he got in his car and left, with one of the police cars following him. I was called to the office during first period. Dr. Martinez, Mr. Chen, Deputy Williams, and one of the police officers who had responded were all there. They asked me to describe everything that had happened with the blue sedan and the man.
The police officer explained that the man had claimed he was doing surveillance on the school because he believed his daughter was being bullied and the school wasn't doing anything about it. The officer said it didn't make much sense and that the man couldn't provide a clear answer about why he was specifically watching me and my car. They'd run his license plate and the car was registered to him. His name was David something, I don't remember the last name. He had no criminal record, which made the situation more complicated. He technically hadn't done anything illegal. Following someone in a public place isn't against the law unless it rises to the level of stalking, and standing in a parking lot isn't a crime. However, the police had told him in no uncertain terms that he was not to come back to the school or have any contact with me. If he did, they would pursue a restraining order and potentially press charges for harassment.
The officer asked if I felt safe at school. I honestly didn't know how to answer that. I felt safer knowing that adults were aware of the situation and taking it seriously, but I was also scared because this man knew what school I went to, what car I drove, and apparently had been watching me for weeks. Dr. Martinez assured me that they would increase security and that Deputy Williams and the campus security guards would be on high alert. They also offered to have someone escort me to and from my car every day if I wanted. I declined the escort. It felt like too much, and I didn't want to be treated differently or have everyone asking questions about why I needed an escort. But I did accept a temporary parking pass for the main lot, right near the entrance where there were always people around. For the next week, everything seemed fine. I didn't see the blue sedan at all. I started to relax a little, thinking maybe the police warning had scared him off for good. Then, the following Thursday, it happened. I was in my fourth period class, AP Biology, which was in one of the science buildings. It was about 11:30 in the morning. We were in the middle of a lab about cellular respiration when the intercom crackled to life. Teachers and students, we are implementing a lockdown effective immediately. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Teachers, please secure your classrooms and follow all lockdown procedures. The announcement ended, and for a moment, everyone in the class just looked at each other in confusion. Our teacher, Mrs. Park, moved quickly, though. She ushered us all away from the windows and the door, turned off the lights, and locked the door. We all huddled in the corner of the classroom that was furthest from the windows. "What's going on?" someone whispered. "Quiet," Mrs. Park said, not unkindly, but firmly. "We need to stay silent." My heart was racing. I immediately thought of the man in the blue sedan. Was this because of him? Had he come back? We sat there in the dark, quiet classroom for what felt like hours, but was probably only about 20 minutes. We could hear sounds from outside, sirens, voices shouting, but everything was too muffled to make out clearly. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I knew we weren't supposed to have our phones out during a lockdown, but I carefully pulled it out and checked. It was a text from my mom. "Are you okay? News is reporting police activity at your school." I texted back, "Lockdown, but I'm okay. Don't know what's happening." I saw that I had messages from several other people too. My dad, Rachel, my older brother who was at college. I sent quick messages to everyone saying I was safe. Then I got a text from an unknown number. "I need to talk to you. They won't let me tell them the truth. I'm trying to protect you." My blood ran cold. I showed the message to Mrs. Park, who immediately called the office on the classroom phone. I could only hear her side of the conversation, but I caught words like threatening text and student safety. After she hung up, she told me that the administration was aware and that I should not respond to the message. She stayed close to me for the rest of the lockdown, which I appreciated. After about 40 minutes total, the intercom came on again. "The lockdown has been lifted. All teachers and students, please remain in your current locations. We will be doing a controlled dismissal by classroom. Wait for further instructions." It took another 30 minutes before someone came to release our classroom. It was Deputy Williams and another officer I didn't recognize. They asked me to come with them while the rest of the class was released to go to the cafeteria. They took me to a conference room where my parents were already waiting, along with Dr. Martinez, Mr. Chen, and 2 detectives. The detectives explained what had happened. The man from the blue sedan, David, had returned to the school that morning. He'd parked in a different lot and had tried to enter the school through a side door that was normally locked but had been propped open by a delivery person. A teacher had seen him and recognized him from the description that had been circulated to all staff after the previous incident. She'd immediately called the office and they'd initiated the lockdown and called police. David had been found in the hallway outside my 4th period classroom. He'd been carrying a notebook filled with pages and pages of writing about me, my schedule, my classes, my car, descriptions of my clothes from different days. It was like a diary of his surveillance. He also had my phone number, which he'd apparently gotten by running my license plate through some online service and finding information connected to my parents' address, then cross-referencing it with other databases. That's how he'd been able to text me. When police confronted him, he'd insisted that he was there to warn me about something. He claimed that he had information about a threat to the school and that I specifically was in danger. None of it made any sense, and he couldn't or wouldn't explain what the threat was or where he'd gotten this information.
He'd been arrested and charged with trespassing, stalking, and harassment. The detectives said they were still investigating whether there would be additional charges. One of the detectives looked at me seriously and said, "We believe you were being stalked by someone experiencing significant mental health issues. He may have fixated on you for reasons we may never fully understand. What's important is that he's in custody now, and we're going to pursue this case vigorously." My mom was crying. My dad looked like he wanted to hit something. I just felt numb. The school suggested that I take a few days off to process everything, and I did. When I came back the following week, there were counselors available to talk to, and the school had implemented even stricter security protocols about visitors and building access. David ended up pleading guilty to the stalking charge and some other related offenses. He was sentenced to probation and mandatory mental health treatment, and there's a permanent restraining order preventing him from coming anywhere near me or the school. I learned later, through some things the detectives told my parents, that David had apparently lost his daughter in a car accident several years earlier. She would have been around my age. The detectives theorized that he'd somehow fixated on me as a replacement for her or something, though the psychological profile was more complex than that. I don't hate him, which surprises some people when I tell this story. I think he was a very sick man who needed help long before any of this happened. But I'm also still afraid sometimes. I'm more careful about my surroundings, about who might be watching. I vary my routines. I check my car before I get in. That experience taught me to trust my instincts. I knew something was wrong from the very first day I saw that blue sedan. I should have reported it immediately instead of waiting. I encourage everyone reading this, if something feels off, if someone's behavior toward you feels wrong or makes you uncomfortable, report it. Tell someone. Don't wait like I did. I'm in college now, at a school in a different state. I still drive that same silver Honda Civic, though I'll probably get a different car soon. Sometimes when I'm walking to my car in a parking lot and I see a dark blue sedan, my heart still skips a beat. But I'm okay. I'm safe. And I'm grateful every day that the situation didn't end worse than it did.
This story takes place during my senior year of high school in 2022. I attended Westfield Academy, a private school in Massachusetts with about 600 students total. It was one of those schools where everyone knew everyone. Small class sizes, lots of individual attention from teachers, that kind of thing. The campus was beautiful, set on about 50 acres with old brick buildings covered in ivy, winding paths between them, and lots of trees. Because it was a private school, security had always been something they took very seriously. We had a fence around the perimeter, security cameras everywhere, and a check-in system for visitors. We did regular lockdown drills, fire drills, and even practiced evacuating for various scenarios. The administration was always very thorough about safety protocols. I was on the student council that year, which meant I was sometimes involved in helping plan school events or communicating with the administration about student concerns. It also meant that I had a pretty good relationship with most of the faculty and staff, including our headmaster, Mr. Blackwell, and our director of security, Miss Chen. The incident happened on a Tuesday in late February. It was one of those gray, cold New England winter days where the sky is just a flat sheet of clouds and there's old snow on the ground that's turned gray and crusty. I remember I was wearing a thick sweater because the heating in some of the older buildings was inconsistent. I had a free period right after lunch that day, which I usually spent in the library doing homework. The library was in the oldest building on campus, a beautiful three-story structure with high ceilings, large windows, and rows of wooden shelves filled with books. It was my favorite place on campus. There were maybe 15 other students in the library that afternoon, scattered around at various tables and in the comfortable chairs by the windows. Mrs. Gallagher, the librarian, was at her desk helping a freshman with research for a history paper. I was working on calculus homework, struggling through derivatives, when the alarm went off. Now, fire alarms at school are annoying but routine. We'd had several that year already, a couple of drills and one false alarm triggered by someone burning popcorn in a faculty microwave. So when the alarms started blaring, my first reaction was just mild annoyance that I'd have to go stand outside in the cold. Mrs. Gallagher stood up and announced in a loud voice, "All right, everyone, you know the procedure. Leave your belongings and exit the building calmly." We all started gathering our coats and heading for the door. The library had two exits, the main one that led to the central staircase and a back one that led to a side stairwell. Most people headed for the main exit because it was closer to the front of the building where we typically assembled during fire drills. I was about halfway to the door when I heard Mrs. Gallagher's phone ring. She answered it, and I saw her face change. She went pale, and her expression shifted from routine annoyance to serious concern. She hung up quickly and called out loudly, "Stop! Everyone stop!" We all froze, looking at her in confusion. The fire alarm was still blaring, making it hard to hear. "That wasn't a fire alarm drill," she said, raising her voice to be heard over the noise. "There's a situation. We need to go into lockdown instead." "What kind of situation?" someone asked. "I don't know all the details, but we're not evacuating. We need to move away from the windows and the doors." This was strange. I'd never heard of switching from a fire alarm response to a lockdown response. It didn't make sense. If there was a fire, we needed to get out of the building. If there was a security threat, why had the fire alarm gone off in the first place? But Mrs. Gallagher's expression told me this wasn't the time to ask questions. We all moved to the center of the library, away from the big windows. Mrs. Gallagher locked the main door, then rushed over to lock the back exit as well. The fire alarm was still going, loud and insistent. It was making it hard to think clearly. One of the sophomore students started to panic. "Are we going to die? Is there a shooter?" "We don't know what the situation is," Mrs. Gallagher said, trying to keep her voice calm. "We just need to follow the lockdown procedures and stay quiet." "But the fire alarm," someone else said. "What if there's actually a fire?" It was a fair question, and one that I was wondering about too. We were told that in the event of a fire, evacuation was always the priority. But here we were, locked in the library with the fire alarm blaring. Mrs. Gallagher went to her desk and picked up her phone. She tried calling someone, probably the main office, but no one answered. She tried again with the same result. "Mrs. Gallagher, should I try texting someone on student council? Maybe someone else knows what's going on?" She thought for a moment, then nodded. Yes, but be quick and then put your phone away. I pulled out my phone and texted the student council group chat. In library, fire alarm, but told to lock down instead. Anyone know what's happening?
Responses came quickly. Same here. Teacher got call, then locked door. We're in gym. No one knows what's going on. Someone said police are on campus? I showed these messages to Mrs. Gallagher. She looked even more worried but tried to hide it. We sat there for about 10 minutes, the fire alarm continuing its ear-splitting noise the entire time. Then suddenly, it stopped. The silence was almost as jarring as the noise had been. In the quiet, we could hear other sounds, sirens outside, footsteps in the hallway, voices that sounded urgent but were too muffled to understand. My phone buzzed with a new text. It was from my friend Maya, who was in her English class in a different building. Just got told via intercom that there was a threat called in. Someone called saying there was a bomb in the school and a gunman on campus. Police are here, still in lockdown. My hands started shaking as I read the message. I showed it to Mrs. Gallagher. She took a deep breath and addressed all of us. I'm not going to lie to you. There appears to have been some kind of threat made against the school. The police are here and they're handling the situation. We need to stay calm and stay put until we're told it's safe. The sophomore who had been panicking earlier started crying. A couple of other students looked like they might join her. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like there wasn't enough air in the room. A senior named Marcus spoke up. Is there anything we can do? To protect ourselves, I mean, if someone actually comes in here? It was the question we were all thinking but hadn't wanted to ask. Mrs. Gallagher looked around the library, assessing our options. If someone tries to enter the library, we have 2 locked doors. If they breach one door, we can escape through the other. We can also, she paused, looking at the heavy wooden tables, we can barricade the doors if needed. Marcus and another senior, Jason, immediately started moving one of the heavy tables toward the main door. A couple of other students jumped up to help. Within a few minutes, they'd positioned a table against each door. Mrs. Gallagher pulled a first aid kit out from behind her desk and set it on a nearby table. Then she did something I'll never forget. She went to a supply closet and pulled out a fire extinguisher, testing its weight in her hands like she was preparing to use it as a weapon if necessary. We waited and waited. Every sound in the hallway made us tense up. Once we heard footsteps approaching and everyone held their breath, but they passed by without stopping. My phone kept buzzing with messages from my parents who had apparently seen something on the news about police activity at my school. I texted them that I was safe and in lockdown in the library. After what felt like hours, but was probably only about 45 minutes, we heard a knock on the main library door. This is the Westfield Police Department. We need to verify that everyone in this room is safe. Please identify yourself. Mrs. Gallagher approached the door cautiously. This is Margaret Gallagher, the librarian. I have 16 students with me. We're all safe. Mrs. Gallagher, we're going to need you to open the door so we can visually confirm everyone's safety and escort you to a secure location. How do I know you're actually the police? She asked. I need verification. There was a pause. Can you see through the door's window? I'm going to hold up my badge. Mrs. Gallagher looked, then stepped back and nodded to Marcus and Jason to move the table. She unlocked the door, and 2 police officers in full tactical gear entered. They did a quick sweep of the library, checking the aisles between the bookshelves. Everyone okay? Anyone injured? One officer asked. We all confirmed we were fine, just scared. We're going to escort you to the gymnasium. We've cleared that area, and we're gathering all students and staff there. Stay together and follow us closely. They led us out of the library and down the hallway. I looked around as we walked. The building looked normal. No signs of damage, no evidence of any kind of attack, but there were police officers everywhere, some with dogs, others with equipment I didn't recognize. When we got to the gymnasium, it was full of students and teachers, everyone sitting in groups on the floor. The atmosphere was tense.
Some people were crying, others were on their phones talking to parents, many just sat in shocked silence. We found out more over the next hour as administrators and police briefed us. Someone had called in a bomb threat to the school, claiming there were multiple explosive devices hidden throughout the buildings. The same caller had also claimed there was an armed individual on campus. The fire alarm had been pulled by someone, they didn't know who yet, which had complicated the response because it meant everyone started evacuating at the same time that police were trying to lock down the school. The police had swept all the buildings with bomb-sniffing dogs and found nothing. They'd also verified that there was no armed individual on campus. The current belief was that it was a hoax, but they were still investigating. Parents started arriving to pick up their students, but it was a slow process because the police needed to maintain control of the scene and verify identities. My parents came about 2 hours after we'd been brought to the gym. My mom was crying when she hugged me. The school was closed for the rest of the week while police continued their investigation. We eventually learned that the bomb threat call had come from an untraceable number, likely someone using an internet-based calling service to hide their identity. As for who pulled the fire alarm, they never definitively determined that, though there was speculation it might have been a student who panicked when the lockdown was announced and thought pulling the alarm would force an evacuation.
In the following weeks, the school implemented even stricter security measures. They installed a new phone system that could send immediate alerts to all classrooms, hired additional security staff, and revised all of our emergency protocols. The psychological impact lasted much longer. The school brought in counselors, and many students, including me, took advantage of that resource. I had trouble sleeping for weeks, jumping at loud noises, feeling anxious whenever I was in the library or heard a fire alarm. What bothered me most was the randomness of it. We never found out who made the threat or why. Was it a student's idea of a prank? Someone with a grudge against the school? A disturbed individual who got some kind of satisfaction from causing fear? We didn't know, and probably never will. That uncertainty was almost worse than if there had been a real threat. At least then we would understand the why of it. Instead, we were left with questions and a persistent feeling of vulnerability. I graduated a few months later and went on to college. I still think about that day sometimes, especially when I hear fire alarms or see news stories about school threats. It changed how I think about safety, about the randomness of danger, about how quickly a normal day can turn into something terrifying. But it also showed me how capable people can be in a crisis. Mrs. Gallagher kept us calm and safe. The police responded quickly and professionally. My fellow students helped each other, comforted each other, protected each other. We all got through it together, and I think that's the most important part of the story. Not the fear, not the uncertainty, but the way people came together when it mattered most. That's what I try to remember when I think about that day. Not the panic or the alarm or the lockdown, but the way Mrs. Gallagher stood there with a fire extinguisher, ready to protect us. The way Marcus and Jason moved those heavy tables without being asked. The way we all looked out for each other. That's what gives me hope, even now.